Welcome back to another Explainer. Look, today we are diving into a really fascinating framework. It's called the survival tree. Now, don't just think of this as some boring botanical diagram, okay? Think of it as a mirror. It's this incredibly profound way to visualize our own psychology, and it brilliantly breaks down how unseen forces from our past, things like pain, fear, conditioning, are actually secretly dictating our everyday lives. Let's get right into it.
There's this really powerful quote. Many people spend their lives trying to change the fruit while never examining the roots. Man, doesn't that just hit the nail on the head? It perfectly highlights a frustratingly common human experience. I mean, think about it. How often do we desperately try to fix the outcomes in our lives, our relationships, our stress levels, the whole shebang, without ever actually looking at the hidden causes buried deep underground? We just keep treating these surface-level symptoms, kind of crossing our fingers and hoping the core issue will magically disappear.
Which begs a pretty stark question, right? If the roots remain exactly the same, what happens to the fruit? Like if you have an apple tree and you suddenly decide, hey, I want oranges today, taping a bunch of oranges to the branches isn't going to fool anybody. Next season, those exact same unchanged roots will inevitably just grow more apples. It's a law of nature. And honestly, it's a law of our psychology too. So to truly understand why our lives look the way they do, we need to do a full anatomical breakdown of this tree.
Okay, let's dive into this. To really understand our own tree, we have to start all the way at the bottom, right beneath the dirt, the unseen foundation. We call this foundational layer the living ground or the great center. Basically, it's the unseen field of intelligence, order, truth, and creative life. Think of it as your mind and body's totally natural baseline, before any of the heavy stuff happened. But here is the absolutely critical takeaway. Trauma literally rewires our nervous system. For example, when a person gets forced into survival mode, the amygdala, the brain's fear center, can become totally hyperactive. It essentially severs that natural connection to the living ground. So instead of operating from a place of natural alignment, the whole system just starts running entirely on the fuel of fear.
And that naturally brings us to the roots themselves. Pain, trauma, fear, abandonment, rejection, shame, conditioning, all those unresolved emotional wounds. This is exactly what a person in survival mode is grounded in. Now, you can't always see these hidden roots, right? But you will absolutely always see their fruit. And it is so vital to remember this. Survival mode isn't a choice for dysfunction, no way. It actually starts out as a brilliant, highly intelligent adaptation just to get through intense, painful experiences. The human system simply adapted to survive whatever it was going through.
Let's move up and see how this builds. As we travel up from those unseen roots, we hit the central structure, the trunk of identity.
Now, typically, two major identities form right here in the trunk. Internally, there's the wounded identity. That's that quiet, painful voice convinced, I am not enough, I am unwanted, I'm unsafe, or unworthy. And to shield that deeply sensitive core, we build up an external, protective identity. This is the armor. It's the loud voice that says, I must stay in control at all costs, or I have to please everyone, or I must avoid intimacy. But here is the really heavy truth about this. The armor meant to protect you eventually becomes the exact cage that imprisons you.
Moving even further up the tree, we finally break the surface and reach the visible branches of outward behavior. Because, as we'll see, what starts internally will always, inevitably, extend outward.
Now, what's really interesting about these behaviors is how society treats them. Things like people-pleasing, avoidance, hyper-independence, emotional withdrawal, perfectionism, overworking. Society often actively rewards these. Have you ever caught yourself apologizing when it wasn't even your fault? We tend to label these things as a strong work ethic or just having good manners. But in the context of the survival tree, these are carefully constructed strategies. Overworking, for instance, might actually just be a frantic attempt to outrun feeling unworthy. They aren't just quirky little habits, guys. They are deep coping mechanisms.
And alongside those behaviors, we've got our protective patterns. Think of these as the really thorny branches. We're talking defensiveness, sudden anger, manipulation, distrust, emotional shutdown, attachment instability, and self-sabotage. These are the defensive walls designed to prevent perceived threats before they even happen. And it's kind of sad, but society harshly judges these thorny branches without ever pausing to understand the terrified roots that feed them. We're so quick to condemn the anger, completely missing the deeply buried fear that built it in the first place.
Which brings us finally to the very top, the fruit of life, the ultimate culmination of all these behaviors over time.
If your roots are grounded in unresolved pain, the fruit your tree produces is going to look exactly like that. We're talking repeated toxic relationships, a totally distorted understanding of love, chronic conflict, anxiety, emotional instability, self-sabotage, isolation, and just a massive disconnection from your true self. It is incredibly painful fruit to bear. But remember, fruit is undeniable objective evidence. If you are consistently harvesting anxiety or toxic dynamics, well, your tree is telling you a really profound truth about what's actually happening underground.
And that brings us to the climax of this whole explanation, the core principle. This is where this entire anatomical breakdown locks together into a single psychological law.
So the crucial point is this seamless chain reaction. Step 1, your roots shape your identity. Step 2, your identity drives your behavior. And step 3, your behavior produces your fruit. It's a continuous, unstoppable flow of energy straight from beneath the dirt all the way up to the tips of the branches. And listen, this is exactly why you can't just slap a shiny new positive habit onto an identity that's rooted in trauma. It just doesn't work. You have to address the entire system.
Moving on to the path to conscious cultivation. Now, I want to totally shift our perspective here for a second, because while all of this might sound kind of heavy, it's actually the ultimate map to freedom. This entire framework, it isn't a judgment of your life, it's an awakening. Once you can actually see the tree for what it truly is, you're no longer blind to the process.
And this brilliantly illustrates the ultimate paradigm shift. See, their survival tree is an unconscious adaptation. It just happened to you. But the virtue tree, that represents conscious cultivation, because adaptation is definitely not destiny. You can actively choose to uproot, heal those old wounds, and completely replant yourself into a brand new, healthy foundation. Unlike a literal tree in the ground, you have the incredible power to move.
So as we wrap up today, I want to leave you with this. Don't just ask yourself what fruit you dislike in your life. Look past the fruit. Look right past the branches. Ask yourself this one transformational question. What am I rooted in? Because every single life is a tree, and eventually, every tree reveals its roots. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. I'll see you next time.